sponsored by Blackmagic Design, the world's highest quality products for the feature film, post and broadcast industries. Blackmagicdesign.com. And by the Tonkawa Film Festival, celebrating short films from around the world. TonkawaFilmFestival.com.
Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend. I'm Jason Godbey and welcome back for part 2 of our coverage of this year's AFI Fest. Joining me now, our man in Hollywood and the man behind ActuallyPaid.com, Mr. Bill Hammon. Welcome back, buddy.
All righty, let's do this.
So, as we mentioned in the previous episode, you shotgunned 16 movies in 5 days, like a madman. And we only got to talk about a few last week, and we talked a little bit about the festival. But if you can we begin with an exciting lightning round, and get give us some movies, then we'll go in detail about some more.
All right, yeah, let's speed run this thing. So yeah, 16 movies in 5 days. I am insane, but we can only give full attention to some of them. So here's a quick recap of the rest of the festival before we get into the more meat of this. First off, Vermiglio. This is Italy's Oscar entry. Beautifully shot and set in the town of the same name in the Alps, focusing on the daughters of the town's teacher and kind of their spiritual leader. It plays like an Italian version of Little Women at times, especially since it's set in the immediate aftermath of World War II, but it is very well acted. Grand Tour. This is Portugal's entry. Very stylish throwback to classic mystery and adventure films, including being shot in black and white. At its core, it's just a story told twice through the perspective of its two leads, a man traveling through Asia to escape his upcoming wedding, and his fiancée in pursuit. Overly simplistic, but on the whole enjoyable. Sujo is Mexico's entry. This shows the life of a poor but brilliant boy trying to get out of the environment of his small community that happens to be run by drug cartels. It's an interesting story, but one we've all seen before. We'll see how it does in the international feature competition. Intercepted is a new documentary about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which becomes all the more poignant in the wake of the election because who knows if we'll keep supporting Ukraine, given that the president-elect loves Vladimir Putin. What's unique about this documentary is that we have footage of Ukrainians kind of picking up the pieces after their homes have been destroyed, juxtaposed with intercepted phone calls from Russian soldiers to their families back home. Some of the soldiers regret what they've done, others fully embrace Putin's propaganda and hatred of Ukrainians, but most of them feel like they're doomed. They feel like they've been sent on a fool's errand to their death because this was not the swift victory that Putin promised it would be. There's some very powerful sound editing here to go along with the cinematography, so look for that potentially to get shortlisted for documentary feature. Under the Volcano is Poland's entry, and it also deals with the war in Ukraine. This time it's a fictional film centering on a family that's on vacation in Spain when the invasion starts. They start as a happy family, now they're refugees in paradise, with the central focus being on the teenage girl Sophia as she tries to juggle her own emotions while also taking care of her little brother, shielding him from the bad stuff in the world, and managing her parents' fear. There's also a Russian family at the same hotel as them, so there's a lot of tension and resentment there. Some good stuff. Santosh is the Oscar entry from the UK. It's a classic film noir from the perspective of female police officers in India. The title character, she's played excellently by Shahana Goswami. When she inherits her late husband's job as a cop, she has to deal with all this institutional sexism while she's investigating the disappearance of a Dalit girl, Dalit being untouchable in the Indian caste system. Universal Language is Canada's entry, directed by surrealist filmmaker Matthew Rankin. In this absurdist circle of life, the cities of Winnipeg and Montreal are both the same, with the same cast of characters, and the whole film is done in Persian as if Canada is now Iran. It may not be all that accessible for the wide audiences, but if you can commit yourself to the sheer silliness of it all, it's a lot of fun. I'm Still Here, Brazil's entry, a very powerful look at how authoritarian regimes thrive, with the story focused on former Congressman Rubens Paiva, who was disappeared by the military dictatorship in the 1970s. The historical plight of Paiva, as well as the resilience of his wife Eunice and their family in getting justice for him, strikes a very resonant chord in today's society. Look for this one to be a major contender for international feature. DEVO, I mentioned it in the last episode, one of 2 documentaries about one of the greatest experimental bands of all time. It's pretty straightforward as far as like a history of a music artist goes. You can detect a little bit of resentment from the surviving members of the band because they didn't make it as big as they feel they should have. But the music is always awesome, and director Chris Smith presents it in a wonderful way with lots of restored film footage and edits that really sell the mystique of the band as well as their music. The last documentary is Architecton by Victor Kosakovsky. His last 2 documentaries, Gunda and Aquarella, were both shortlisted by the Academy, so I'm not going to be surprised if this one is as well. It's very similar to Aquarella in that film had this intense audiovisual experience of watching the life cycle of water, of all things. So now we have Architecton, which looks at how mountains of stone that are millions of years old, how they're strip mined for the purposes of making cheap concrete. The whole thing is shot in 48 frames a second, and that gives you this really immersive high-def experience that film nerds are going to love. And finally, A Real Pain, which we discussed on this show back when it premiered at Sundance. I don't know how much more I can add to what Eric McClanahan said, only to stress that this is one of the best films of the year. Kieran Culkin deserves a supporting actor nomination. And as of right now, this is my pick for the best screenplay of the year.
Wow. That was awesome, dude. That was amazing. And I just had so much. I had like I'm a little bit information overloaded. The picture from Brazil, it sounds a bit like, remember the animated movie that you reviewed last year? I think it was last year, it was all done with like, it was kind of like a documentary where they used recordings and things like that, but it was all animated about the musician who was disappeared.
Oh yeah, they shot the piano player. Yeah, this happened a few years before that one. Like, but it all during the military junta, for lack of a better term, in Brazil at the time. Yeah, thousands of people were arrested, kidnapped, tortured, killed, completely disappeared. This is much more of a fictional tale. I mean, they shot the piano player was also fictitious, but it was presented like it was a documentary that they then animated, whereas this one is just a work of pure drama. When you see all the intimidation tactics, all of the interrogations, like all these weird methods that are used to basically paint anyone as a communist and therefore expendable and executable, really just it makes you worry. And the lead performances were just absolutely stellar.
The other one I was curious about is the DEVO picture. I'm a sucker for a good rockumentary. Mark Mothersbaugh, who was in DEVO, he's a film composer.
There is a brief mention of the post DEVO work that he does. I mean, he created the theme song for Rugrats and Pee-wee's Playhouse, which is right on brand. He's a film composer. He's done everything from The Life Aquatic to Cocaine Bear. Like, he's very prolific when it comes to film score, and it's always fun to listen to his scores because there's always a hint of DEVO in it. So that's always fun.
All right, man. Well, let's talk about some more movies. We got another one. This next one is Cronenberg, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So we do have a couple more that we can discuss.
We spoke about body horror last. Does this also? When I hear Cronenberg, I think body horror. Is this also a body horror picture?
In name only. Like, this is not The Fly or Crimes of the Future where he's going out of his way to be grotesque. But he does incorporate that into a much deeper, emotionally resonant story. This is The Shrouds. It debuted at Cannes and competed for the Palme d'Or, didn't win, but this is a film that started out as a Netflix series before it got canceled. The development kind of just went on because this is a very personal film for David Cronenberg, in that he conceived it as a way to deal with the death of his wife back in 2017. Him being an atheist, there's not much in the realm of supernatural or afterlife type thingies to look forward to if this is, your philosophy. He conceived of this film and originally as a series to try to figure out, like, how do we process this when we have nothing to believe in? So what he comes up with in the Shrouds is you have a man named Karsh, played by Vincent Cassel, who is absolutely amazing in this. He's a stand-in for Cronenberg in that he's an atheist agnostic who lost his wife, named Becca, played by Diane Kruger. Diane Kruger plays 3 roles in this, and it's kind of amazing. After she died, he created these kind of weird technological burial shrouds, and invented these graveyards where essentially you could bury your loved one in the shroud, and there are sensors in the shroud that connect to a screen on the tombstone, so you can literally watch the process of your loved one decomposing. And he finds a weird comfort in that because, in a way, his wife is still tangible. She's still there. She's not alive and she can never be alive again, but there is still an emotional connection that he can feel when he has no higher power to believe in. Like, there's something oddly poetic and disturbing about it, but it's not horror. It's just macabre. The story of the film, basically, his graveyards get vandalized by any number of parties who oppose what he's doing, whether it's on religious or environmental grounds or social, political, whatever. So it's up to him to kind of figure out, one, why these graves are being vandalized when they're not supposed to be. 2, he's noticed what looked like growths on his wife's bones because she died of bone cancer. But it's like, once the body dies, the cancer dies with it. So how is this even possible? And he's also trying to figure out a way to move on, in his own life, because he's still a lonely man who has needs. He confides in a character named Maury, played by Guy Pearce, in a fun little manic role where he's like a conspiracy theorist and a tech genius. But he's also his ex-brother-in-law because he was married to his wife's sister, Terry, also played by Diane Kruger. Like, they're basically twins. So there's that weird dynamic. And Maury has also designed an AI digital assistant named Honey, who's modeled after the dead wife. So again, voiced by Diane Kruger. Like, it's kind of amazing how much work she does in this, because she's playing the living Terry. She's playing a memory, in flashbacks and nightmares of Becca, who we see, deteriorate. Her bone cancer is so severe that she has body parts amputated. That's the pure Cronenberg aspect, is like seeing this woman, missing an arm and a breast. And then she also plays this AI assistant who, credit to the developer, she is alluring. Like she's programmed very well. So there's this whole, maelstrom of emotion and confusion about, how do you honor the dead? How do you go on with life? Is it a betrayal to move on? Is it necessary? Like, there are a lot of big questions asked, and the biggest one being, when have you done enough to honor someone, to respect their wishes and their memory? And they're not directly answered. That would be against Cronenberg's style. But I found myself thinking, like, this is more heady and more thought-provoking than most of his work. Because, again, the body horror is just there as makeup effects for the most part. It's there to set a premise, not to actually gross you out. It's really there so that you can put yourself in Vincent Cassel's shoes and be like, would I do this? Would I be capable of doing this? What am I capable of doing if the love of my life is taken from me unfairly? I was kind of amazed at how well he was able to ask those questions but leave the answers up to the audience in a way that was still emotionally and narratively satisfying. This was surprisingly good. I I mean, I've always been a fan of Cronenberg's work, but it's like, wow, like he went above and beyond on this one.
I've liked some of his films. I can't watch most of them. Like, I have like it's one of those things that I just don't want to see. Okay, so that film's about death.
But I will stress, because you brought this up, the body horror is just makeup effects. There is no grotesquerie here. There's no cutting people open to see what oozes out. There's no Jeff Goldblum mid-fly, begging for death. It's just like many people in this country have amputations and they still live full lives and they are still loved by their loved ones, and it just kind of like goes toward the idea of you're slowly but surely going away from me. You're being taken away. And there's nothing really graphic about the removal. It's just one moment Diane Kruger walks out the door fully formed, and the next moment she walks in with missing an arm and a breast. And there's just scars on her. We don't see the amputations being done. That's the major departure from Cronenberg's other works. It's because again, this is all in Karsh's head as he's dreaming, so he wasn't there to see it happen, so we don't see it happen.
Okay, that's interesting because it sounds more respectful,
And it's surprisingly heartfelt. Like I was genuinely shocked at how much I was feeling things while watching this.
In our last episode, we talked about Room Next Door, which also deals with the subject of death. Please tell me, so this is our last episode for the year. Please tell me we're ending on a high note. We're ending. We're give me some hope here, Bill.
Okay, so this film, this last entry, does have bad stuff around it, but it is empowering. It is positive. This is the German entry for international feature, The Seed of the Sacred Fig. It's a political thriller. It was written and directed by Mohammad Rasulov, who basically had to film this in secret and then smuggle the film out of Iran to finish it in Germany because he was going to be arrested for making this film that questions the regime. In the wake of Mahsa Amini's death a couple of years ago, when this young woman was arrested by vice police and essentially beaten to death for not wearing her hijab properly, spawned massive protests across Iran for the way the Revolutionary Court and the police deal with women. That's the backdrop for this film. You have Iman, played by Misak Zara, who does a fantastic job here. He's an investigator, and he's just been promoted to a job as an investigative judge in the Revolutionary Court. He thinks it's because he's earned the spot for after 20 years of loyal service, but really he's being set up to fail because the administration is going to crack down on protesters, and they want him to literally sign hundreds and hundreds of death warrants for all these people who dare speak out against the Ayatollahs. Iman is a deeply faithful family man. He loves his wife Najmeh and his two daughters Rezvan and Sana, as well as their friend Sadaf. He's been a very loving, supportive father for a long time. But the stress of all this situation and the powder keg that's being lit in Tehran drives his daughters and Sadaf to join the protests, to fight back against the way women are treated in Iran. At one point, Iman has his gun stolen. He's issued a gun by the government as a means to protect himself, and he's told to be as anonymous as possible, get his family off of social media, don't give away any information where people could show up to his house, but if they do, he's got a gun. That gun goes missing. Chekhov is dancing in his grave rather than rolling. And the question becomes, who took the gun and why? Did he just misplace it, which would be his own fault, and therefore the reason, more than enough reason for his bosses to fire him because they set him up to take a fall? Or did his wife or daughters take the gun as a means of rebelling? And if so, at what lengths will he go to to get it back? Will he, in essence, interrogate and maybe even torture his own family to keep the regime propped up? It's very Hitchcockian for a good deal of the runtime. And then in the third act, when things come to a head, it stops being Hitchcockian and goes full Kubrick. There's a chase scene in the ruins of an old town that plays like a desert version of the hedge maze from The Shining. It's that good. I was floored at the direction from Rusalov, from the performances, particularly Masaru Ostami as Rezvan and Satara Maleki as Sana. Like they, and then you have Sohila Golestani playing Najmi. Like she is so torn between the love of her daughters and the love of her husband and what she's been raised her entire life to believe in the regime. There's so much intellectual and emotional honesty on display here that while there is clearly a villain here, everyone's perspective is understandable, even the most regressive authoritarian one. So to see all of these conflicting viewpoints come together in what could be an act of very tragic violence while we watch literal footage that was smuggled out of Iran and posted on social media of the police beating and killing protesters in the streets. They used the real footage that people captured on their phones. It was like, this is not just some narrative created out of nothing based on an idea of the current events. This is living in it. And the fact that the director himself had to flee the country to avoid prison just for making this movie is something truly extraordinary. Like, I know that Emilia Perez out of France with Selena Gomez and Zoe Saldana, like that's getting a lot of the press and marketing for international feature, but for right now, this is my front runner.
The seed of the sacred fig. Do they ever explain what that is?
Yeah, it's explained in opening text. Essentially, a metaphor, a literary device that is kind of foundational to Iran and like Persian history. It's taken on new meaning in the modern day because the sacred fig, the seeds itself can be planted anywhere, but they kind of act as a weed. As the fig grows, it'll strangle the plant that it's nearest to. And so there's a metaphor that the sacred fig is the Iranian revolutionary regime that grew out of something very small and pure, but has ended up choking the life out of the nation as it's held on to power. So that it's explained much more eloquently than I can do in the film's opening text. If anybody's curious, so you will get that metaphor right up front. So that you can understand what's going on with the girls, with Iman, with Nejme, and all the other characters as the film unfolds.
Well, it sounds, wow, that sounds really powerful, man. That sounds like a hell of a picture.
This is the odd foreign film that could easily get a Best Picture nomination.
We saw some really good work toward the end of this year. I mean, we've seen good work all year long, like from Tribeca, from this. It sounds like a much better year of movies than last year in a way, just because last year we were playing strike ball, but now it feels like people are really getting back to acting, getting back to strong writing, strong storytelling, and I'm really curious to see how these movies are going to do at the box office, and if they'll do well in other places like for award season and stuff. But it sounds like a hell of a crop, man. I got to wrap up, but this should be our last one for the year. So thank you for doing this with me. You've been here all year long and doing great work, so I thank you for that. And we'll have more content for people as into 2025. But for everyone listening, thanks so much and happy holidays. And Bill, if they want to read your reviews and see your work, where can they find you?
They can find me at actuallypaid.com. They can find me right here on No Rest for the Weekend. They can find me on Twitter and YouTube at actually_paid. And hopefully, as a lot of the quality work has been backdated into November and December, I can start really getting into the meat of what's going to be good this year. So hopefully we're going to have a lot of strong stuff as we close out the calendar.
And that's all for this edition of No Rest for the Weekend. Thanks so much for taking this trip down the rabbit hole once again. For more of our content, including more movie reviews, visit norestfortheweekendpodcast.com. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, youtube.com/getbehindtherabbit. I'd like to thank Bill Hammon, and a big thanks to our sponsors, the Tonkawa Film Festival and Blackmagic Design. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
This is the BTRP Media Network.